Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining our Fireside Chat, Winning the Global AI Race. I'm Vanessa Pineda, the engagement lead for INFER. Today's Fireside Chat is going to explore what different countries are doing as part of the artificial intelligence race, who is leading, and what the impacts are of this technology to people and governments around the world. Now I'm pleased to introduce our moderator, Beth Sanner. Beth is professor in practice at the University of Maryland's Applied Research Lab for Intelligence and Security, CNN National Security Analyst, and a former Deputy Director of National Intelligence. Thank you so much for being our moderator, Beth. I'll turn things over to you now.
I'm really happy to be back with you all. I think this is our third session and not our last. And I want to welcome all of our forecasters and potential forecasters and anyone who's just interested in artificial intelligence. We're going to have a great conversation today, and we're really lucky to have with us Greg Dawson. Greg is a clinical professor at the W.P. Carey School of Business at Arizona State University and is beaming in today from Phoenix. He researches the legal, social, and technical public policy ramifications of the adoption of artificial intelligence in the public and private sector. And he recently completed a series of articles on the National Artificial Intelligence Strategy, which was just published by Brookings. And we'll have a link to that either here or when we publish this webinar. Prior to becoming an academic, Greg was a partner in the advisory practice at PricewaterhouseCoopers in DC and in California, and he was also a director in Gartner State's local government consulting practice. He currently consults on advanced technology topics with a number of governmental entities in the US and abroad. And so I just want to thank you, Greg. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it, the opportunity.
Yeah, well, we've had some fun offline conversations in preparation for this webinar. So I know that we're going to get into some really interesting territory, but I wanted to start off with a bit about you so our audience understands who you are and what you've done. And I want to just ask, how did you get interested in national AI development, and what led you in your career path to where you are now?
Well, it's kind of interesting. As you said, I started out in public accounting and spent the bulk of my career with PricewaterhouseCoopers in the government consulting practice. When I decided to become an academic, naturally I became an accounting professor. And what occurred to me was the application of artificial intelligence in the consulting field, right? And more specifically in the accounting field. Because as a partner, I was constantly looking for the best way to perform an engagement, and AI was something that we would always consider as part of it. So I started looking at AI within accounting, and within accounting, the primary uses for AI is to catch bad guys, right? You can't have some poor 22-year-old, going through reams and reams and reams of data to try and spot the anomaly. But AI does that. AI does that quickly and can do it quite well. So then taking that up to the next level of abstraction, thinking about that from the public good standpoint. You mentioned smart cars at one point in our conversation, which is a classic example of AI. Well, there's a lot of the idea of smart cars, they need to be developed and they need to be developed well, but there's a lot of unintended consequences as part of those. And that got me interested. And then, frankly, take it to the international level. Because at the international level, as you said, we looked at the National Artificial Intelligence Strategy plans for 44 different countries. And let me tell you, there are a lot of differences that are in play there. And that's what sparked this line of research.
Well, that's a great place for us to dive in because you have done this research on these 44 countries and their national strategies. And, people can go and read a little bit more about that, but can you summarize, what are the different approaches and what are different countries practically doing?
Yeah, at this point, we don't use this phrase in the Brookings work, but I think it's apropos. All of the AI plans, when they're first developed, were very aspirational, right? So you're talking baseball, motherhood, apple pie. Nobody's talking about world domination, all right? So the functions that we're seeing from most of the AI plans around healthcare. So, for example, how countries should deal with things like the COVID-19 pandemic. Great use of AI. Transportation, sustainability is a huge issue, and AI can be very, very helpful to better position transportation to be more sustainably focused. Education is big, and environmental is also big. What's curious to me, what really got me kind of going on this was the fact that defense was very low. I mean, everybody sort of, nodded and said, yeah, there's probably, gee whiz, a defense application. And criminal justice. Very few people talked about the justice end of it. So what keeps occurring to me more and more, these countries are just kind of lining up, and from what they're saying, it's all very pro-social good, and let's do good things and hug each other.
So you probably mentioned that that's probably not exactly how it's working out.
No, it's we've been able to divide. So when the plans are written, they're aspirational. Okay, so you get, as we said, 44 different countries have developed their plans, but now we're seeing real movement in countries actually going through and implementing their plans. So what we're looking at right now is China is so far in the lead of other countries. It's almost absolutely ridiculous. They're lapping the field right now. Countries that are close to them: Germany, UK, South Korea, India, and Canada are all kind of in the same ballpark. From a potential standpoint, India. I mean, India has so many people, and they're so well educated, and in many, many ways, India closely aligns to the U.S. from a social standpoint and from a approach to government standpoint. You're seeing the U.S. from a tech perspective. I mean, doggone, we got a lot of money, and we're throwing a lot of money at building the computers that are necessary to operate. Where we, U.S., fall short is we don't have the people. Surprising countries like Russia. We first started writing this series of articles before Russia had invaded Ukraine. And I think my perspective was that Russia was a very big, powerful force. And, they had the people, they had the technology, and they could pull it off. Certainly, Ukraine has shown the limitations of Russia, but even more so in our writing this up, Russia is, they're very, very far back in the pack now. They're not even in the same discussion as a lot of other countries. And of course, my favorite has to be Uruguay. If I had listed the first 44 countries to develop a national AI plan, I probably wouldn't have put Uruguay there, but doggone it, they have it, and it's quite respectable.
So you've done this survey, then this research of these countries, and you've come up with, which countries are ahead and which countries are lagging. How do you measure that? Because I know that a lot of our forecasters are always looking for frameworks and different ways of marking progress. Can you provide us some information about that?
Yeah, so what we did, and I won't get too mathematical on it, but we identified 25 different data elements that we thought would be associated with artificial intelligence. And then what we did was called a factor analysis. With a factor analysis, you're basically looking to see what attributes group together. So two groups emerged mathematically from this. The first one was human capital. So the people part of the equation. And what was in here was how many people had STEM degrees, how many people had advanced degrees, how many job postings talked about artificial intelligence, so the people part of it. The other part of it was technical dimension. You've got to have the boxes and the background research to be effective in actually implementing AI. So things that would fall under there were number of research papers, number of patents, number of supercomputers. So from this, we developed a 2x2 matrix, all right? And so we called the high people, high technology, we called those leaders. Countries in there, China, Germany, and India are the prominent ones. The dimension of high technical, low people, the US led this. Got great technology, really lacked the people. The high people, low technology, this is where countries like Singapore are very good, okay? So they've got highly qualified people, but just lack the investment. And then finally, we call the last quadrant, the low, we call that the aspirational quadrant. And that's where countries like Russia and Uruguay would sit. But what we really wanted to focus on was those high. So China, India, Germany, UK, and again, U.S. not part of that group. We thought that the U.S. was at 46% of the people part versus China versus India.
So maybe we can dig in first a little bit more about the U.S. and then we can talk about China then. So last year, I guess the Biden administration passed the National Artificial Intelligence Initiative Act as a way of us trying to catch up. And, you know, is this going to be helpful? Is this enough? Where do you think this positions us?
The concept of the act is a great one, okay? Because we need to have sort of this high level oversight, this high level governance, this high level of strategy. But the way the data is looking right now, they're not doing very much. You know, I think the best way to compare what the U.S. is doing with what China is doing is the U.S. is treating all the potential projects as equally valid. Okay, so they're not differentiating from a money standpoint, from a focus standpoint, or anything. They're basically saying we're gonna plant 1,000 different flowers, and we're gonna see which one blooms. But we're not going to overly focus on one versus the other at the beginning. Whereas with China is doing we here are 3 good ideas. This is the best idea, and this is the idea we're going after.
What would be these particular focus areas that you think that would be most promising for the United States?
For the United States, Beth, there's still a whole lot of fear around AI in the world, right? And with this country, I think everybody's been conditioned to see, movies like that old Tom Cruise movie, Minority Report, where, the system and the government knew everything about you, and it was corruptible. And led to, it was a good movie. If you haven't seen it, you should see it. But I think so what we've got to do is initially the U.S. needs to focus on the applications or the use cases that we can all agree are for the public good, okay? So things like healthcare. Everybody in the country wants good healthcare. We can develop AI around healthcare to make sure that people are getting equitable healthcare and things of that nature. So I think that's an easy one. I think environmental is an easy one. I think education is an easy one. These are all things that are generally public good. And everybody within this country would agree that those are good and right applications.
So let's turn to China then, because they are definitely the ones, as you say, that are lapping the rest of the competition. How can you apply China to the framework that you gave us and explain how do we know that this is the case, and what exactly are they focused on in terms of these specific things that you mentioned, instead of the whole waterfront really focusing in?
It's interesting. Again, everybody's talking about motherhood and apple pie, environmental, healthcare, et cetera, and nobody's really talking about things like defense and things like criminal justice, and just doing the right things. Okay, so it would be inappropriate in their plan to say we plan to conquer the world, and so they're not saying that. So from one perspective, the U.S. and the Chinese plans are actually very similar in terms of what they say it's going to cover. But China telegraphed a couple of things that to me was absolutely fascinating. From a governance standpoint, China is not talking about things like how is this going to be regulated? What are we going to do about social inequality? What are we going to do about risk? From an algorithm standpoint, algorithms drive the use case. China is absolutely silent on ethics they're silent on bias, they're silent on transparency, and they're silent on trust. So, whereas I think the U.S. and most other countries are saying, hey, we understand that an algorithm needs to be, ethical, without bias, transparent, and with trust. China is very clearly not touching that at all. So that to me worries me because certainly one of the things we saw, I finished a series of papers on COVID, and it became abundantly clear that China was underreporting their COVID cases. Okay, they were hiding things, and I think here they've maybe given us some insight that maybe they didn't intend to give us, and that they have uses for this that are very government centric, that are not necessarily things that people would feel comfortable about.
How do you define this idea of them lapping us? Like when you compare that to, the metrics that you talked about with Germany and India and the US, in what ways are they really strong? I guess everything.
Yeah, I mean, we put them in the 98th percentile for both technology and people. I mean, China's got, 1.4 billion people, so approximately a billion people more than we have in the US. So they have the people. Their universities do a whale of a good job educating people on STEM dimensions. Government is putting a lot of money into STEM related things. China's got a lot of money also, so they're investing in supercomputers. We've got a report coming out showing that China has approximately 5 times more supercomputers than the next 4 countries combined. There's just a lot of technology that's sitting there, whereas the U.S., from a patent standpoint, from a research standpoint, we're doing the good due diligence. We just don't have the people. The Chinese students that we educate in this country, from a visa standpoint, a lot of them are going back to China, whereas I think a lot of them would like to stay here and work on U.S.-based projects, given the nature of visas, et cetera. They're going back, and that's helping China get more and more in front.
Let's back up a little bit into what you mentioned a second ago about these ethical dilemmas. And it seems like the US and the West are more focused on that, and China doesn't seem to have any of that in mind. What do you think, we should be most concerned about as just global citizens in that realm? Probably
first I put unintended consequences. Right? From a unintended consequence, let's talk about an algorithm. There's this concept called algorithmic bias, which is that the algorithm will will give you an answer based on the data, but it might or might not be what you want. Okay, might or might not be appropriate. So, the most famous example is Google a couple of years ago had an AI to determine what sort of jobs to show you, Beth, as a female versus what to show me, Greg, as a male. And once they determined that you were a woman, they would show you clerical jobs. Once they determined that I was a man, they would show me executive managerial jobs. So is there reason to do that? Well, yes, in the sense that there's the C-suite in Fortune 500 companies tend to be more male than female. Administrative people tend to be more female than tend to be male. But that is really a bad thing for reasons that hopefully I don't want to go into, right? City of Chicago did a study to determine where they should put their policing based on arrest records. Guess what their model showed? They should arrest every African-American male between 15 and 25, and then crime rate would plummet. This is not right. This is simply not right. We also have a lot of evidence of people trying to hack algorithms or take advantage of them. So a few years ago, Microsoft came out with Microsoft Tay, and Tay was a chatbot, and they connected Tay to Twitter, and Microsoft very proudly said, okay, we're going to demonstrate machine learning, and within 1 week, Tay will be able to speak to like an American teenager. So go ahead, everybody, tweet at Tay, and Tay will learn how to do this. And they said in 7 days, after 7 hours, they had to take Tay offline because she was saying Hitler was right, we should kill the Jews. So people have hacked into the algorithm. There's not all nice actors out there, right?
Is there something that you are particularly worried about in terms of China and some of the technology that they are putting forward?
Yeah, so China, so think about things like facial recognition. China has made it clear that as part of their smart cities initiative, so smart cities is basically AI at a city level, that they are facially doing a facial identification. Everybody walks by. Their justification for it is person X walks by and we know that they're a known criminal. We want to pick them up. Okay. So, and that's the way it's being positioned. It's kind of creepy. It's kind of creepy. I was working with a city here in the U.S. I won't mention them, but what they were looking at, their cameras absolutely had the ability to do facial recognition. However, they turned that off because they wanted their smart city to be based on a lot of people came to this park, so the bathrooms are going to be dirty, the trash cans will need to be empty. We need to send, the maintenance crews there. China sort of unleashed this. We're going to take advantage of every piece of technology that's out there and apply it in a way that suits us, the government, best. Now you add on to it that they're doing very little validation of the data. So, my brother and I, who look somewhat similar, certainly one could be mistaken for the other, and he's a criminal, I'm not. Sorry, Brad, not really true. But I could be picked up instead of him, like he should be picked up. Also, where does it end, right? So think about, creating government unrest. How is it going to? And right now we see in Russia all the people that are massing against Putin and the government based on Ukraine. I would be absolutely willing to bet that people in China, knowing that every street corner can positively identify them, there's not going to be this pushback on the government. So government then will become this unfettered power. Now, so that's internal. Now you take it external. Think about the advantage of AI in the battlefield. All right. So this is one reason why the U.S. weapons have been so effective with Ukraine. It's absolutely jam-packed with AI-based things, and so that information is being provided to them. So let's say China takes that ability. Again, they've got insights that you and me, as poor simple humans, just can't possibly produce. So do we have firm evidence that China is going to be a bad actor in this place? No, we don't. But do we have firm evidence that they're going to be a good actor? We don't. I'm not necessarily 100% comfortable with that either.
Well, I will add that we know that they're using this kind of technology in Xinjiang to, keep track of and crack down on the Uyghur minority there. So we know that they've used it at least internally for definitely bad purposes. There's sanctions against China as a result.
Yeah, and think as the technology gets better, right? So they've already established, with your example, sort of their ethical or governmental philosophy. Imagine as the technology gets better and they can more enact what they want to do against these minorities.
It's definitely a slippery slope. So where are we on this idea of governance? The UN has tried over the years to do different kinds of models of governance on different technologies. What's kind of the state of play on that?
Beth, I have to say I'm not encouraged, right? Governance at some level involves the concept of morality and ethics. And I think asking a whole bunch of different countries to come up with the same definition of what's considered ethical, I don't think that's going to happen. So, are there good ethical practices that we in the U.S. and other countries would agree on. So transparency, all those sorts of things. Yes, the pieces exist, but as you know, the ethics in China and what the Chinese government considers to be ethical is different from Russia, different from Canada, and different from the U.S. So I think it's a great thing, but what we've seen with the UN, I'll go back to Ukraine for just a moment. All of the models of the UN say that Russia is doing a bad thing and should be stopped, right? However, Russia continues to do what Russia is doing, and so the UN, I think the UN is great for providing parameters for countries to live within. Whether the country chooses to live within those parameters gets to be a little bit dicey.
So the last kind of thought in this section I have is about the democratization of this technology. And, what does it mean that pretty much anybody can, create some algorithms and apply AI?
The interesting thing to come out is like Colorado just said their state fair art contest. And, they've got the normal categories of painting with oil, painting with watercolors, and they also have a category of computer art. And, their idea is that people would go onto their computer and, manipulate things. Well, it turns out that the guy who won the Colorado State Fair for Computer used an AI algorithm to generate what people like to see, the color combinations, the scenes, etc. And so he had AI develop this piece of art that he submitted and won the California State Fair. Now, and you should look at the picture. It's beautiful in every sense of the word. It touches on every emotion you have. So is that a good thing to do? It certainly shows the power of AI to understand that, people are drawn to pictures of the ocean. So therefore, everything's got to have an ocean background. We're touched by animals. All these things that if we studied really, really hard for a whole lot of time, we could probably start to understand it, but we wouldn't be able to put it together. But it's a great way, in my opinion, to allow people to actually experience AI and to see what AI can do. But like I said, with Microsoft, hey, not everybody's going to use this with good intentions. People will use it for bad things. And I think Tay proves that. So, it's kind of like the debate around nuclear power. Can nuclear power do wonderful things? Of course it can. Is there huge risk? Yes. Well, now we're sort of taking the ability to create a nuclear reactor. And we're putting it in, every home in the U.S. on every computer in the U.S. Is that something, so? Is it good for good people? Yes. Is it bad for bad people? Yes. But, we're in the age of experimentation, right? And so maybe doing things like this will get people to say, you know what, I want to learn how to create ethical AI with transparency and trust and all those things. And then they build things that look like that. So that's the positive. But again, this is unfettered, and the tools out there are absolutely remarkable.
So, Greg, what do you think about, I think that there are so many positives, and obviously the U.S. government and people like you, everybody thinks that we should be driving ahead and doing better. What do you think that the U.S. should be doing to close the gaps and to be more competitive?
Yeah, so great question, Beth. We've got a great model of the way things worked before in the early 60s with the space race. So when we were convinced that Russia had the lead with the space race, what did we as a country do? We marshaled every bit of resources we had from a technology perspective. The government said, this is the type of rocket that we're going to do. This is the type of approach that we're going to do. Everybody do research on what makes good rockets. But we also, there was a major effort to insert technology and science more strongly into the school system. I read an article somewhere, and basically, what people were saying about the U.S. school system prior to the 60s, from a technology standpoint, it was awful. There was very little science. It was all about, reading Walden and stuff like that. That, while good and valuable, it's not going to help us build rockets. Okay, so one thing that we can do to be able to catch up is to apply the lessons from the U.S. space race, right? And build this talent pipeline that's lacking. From a GDP standpoint, the U.S. is in great shape. So it's not that we lack the technical resources, financial resources, but what we lack is that generation of people coming up that could do it. So I think that's one thing. The second idea that I've bandied around is more of a consortium approach. So sort of a NATO, if you will, for artificial intelligence. The idea that Germany and the UK, have got a good amount of people that are interested in AI and science and technology, but they don't necessarily have the financial and technical resources that the US have. So what we could do is apply a consortium approach and basically say, and I'm just going to use the NATO block. We NATO are going to share this development because we share common enemies and we share common philosophies of what's good governance and what's good technology and what are appropriate uses. Kind of my issue there is that, look at the piston battle that France and Australia got into over submarines. It's so as I recall, Australia was going to buy subs from France and then decided to buy from the U.S. and there was a giant kerfuffle. We can't have that kind of kerfuffle. This is too important for us to let these little squabbles take place. The third idea is, if you look at the country that's exactly opposite of us from a strengths and weaknesses standpoint, it's India, right? India has a boatload of very talented technical people who, but India lacks the money. India lacks the technical resources, the financial resources to implement it. That's where we're very strong. So we could certainly do a partnership with another country. And again, the one that I suggested, my co-authors and I suggested, was India because of what their strengths are relative to what our strengths are. Obviously, there are some challenges there because both countries would have to fully open up in terms of what would need to be done. And certainly with your background, Beth, you understand that there's a host of issues associated with that. I think the long-term strategy is the first one. So we've got to invigorate our national pipeline.
And it does sound like having a better immigration focus on, bringing tech people in. I mean, I hear complaints all the time from businesses about how difficult it is with the, the visas for Indians to come in, for example, that we're just not opening up the doors enough to people who really will bring talent here.
Yeah, and I mean that problem has existed, as you know. Certainly, the Trump administration was very restrictive in terms of the use of visas like that. For my own time within the university, again, my students from India, my students from China are incredibly talented, and the vast majority of them would like to stay here and contribute to what we're doing. But as you point out with the with the H-1B visa lottery, what is it? 1 out of 10 can stay. It's the odds are fairly discouraging.
Yeah, they really are. The one thing that you mentioned I wanted to ask about was out of this act that was passed last year was the National Artificial Intelligence Initiative Office, and NAIIO. And can you
just rolls off the tongue, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's not. I have to look at it every time. What is it supposed to do, and how well positioned is it to do that?
Yeah. So again, this act I think is a brilliant act. I should have looked up to see who sponsored it, but an absolutely brilliant idea to have the coordination around there. So what they were supposed to do is a couple of things. First of all, they were supposed to sustain consistent report for artificial intelligence research and development. So they're responsible for making sure that academics and practitioners involved with this are writing research papers and doing the sort of critical research on the technology end, on the people end, and from the process end. They're supposed to promote and encourage AI education. So getting into starting at the high school level, getting into the colleges and universities to make sure that AI is a part of that. They're supposed to support interdisciplinary AI research. Our friends in computer science are absolutely brilliant, but our friends in public policy bring a different perspective. And if you can get people doing research at the intersection of AI and public policy, quite frankly, an area that I'm very comfortable with, you can take the benefits of what's going on from the computer science AI development and pair it with the real world problems. They're supposed to coordinate interagency artificial intelligence, and they're supposed to look for international cooperation. And all this is supposed to be done over the idea of creating trustworthy AI systems. So I think it's brilliant. I think that
it sounds again, like humongous, and I suppose that it's like 100 people or something.
So their charge is great. They've got a couple of problems. First, they don't have nearly as much. They don't have nearly as many people as they need. Second, they got no hammer, right? So they can encourage and beg and plead, but they don't have money to throw after the problem, and they don't have the ability to pound on people who don't do it. And third, I mean, Beth, we're kind of in the wild, wild west here regarding AI. There's very, very few things that we know for sure. So we know that an algorithm is trustworthy. Well, what's the trustworthy algorithm mean? Does that mean it's accurate 95% of the time, 98, 100%? So we got the nice words going around here, but we don't necessarily have the thinking to go around it. So I do have, I just finished a paper that was published in Brookings just a couple of days ago that was looking specifically at the US federal government spending on AI. Now, you remember what I told you? I said that there was, our national plan was focused on environmental, on education, on all these nice things. Well, we don't. 87% of US federal government spending is within the Department of Defense. So is the Department of Defense a good laboratory to do it? Absolutely. But we're not really, we're talking the talk, we're not really walking the walk in terms of what we said we were using AI for. At this point, like I said, 87% of the contract dollars are being spent within the Department of Defense. And that having been my client for a very long time when I was a government consultant, good organization, ethical people, smart people, so I don't doubt that. But we looked at something like 650 different contracts, and only a very, very small handful of companies had more than a single contract. So what this is telling me is, first of all, and I'm going to quote here, this coordinate federal interagency AI activities. Not seeing a whole lot of coordination there, that if there's a whole lot of one-off contracts, that tells me there's not a lot of coordination. What was really interesting to me about seeing that, though, was that, excuse me, a lot of the contracts, the contractor is geographically located very close to the source of where the contract's coming from. Okay, so what this sort of suggests to me is, first of all, the U.S. is funding. If you say AI, here's a contract for $100,000, go and think about something, as opposed to aggregating and focusing. But it also suggests to me, and this is using data, I'm going to pump up for a minute, from Leadership Connect, who provided all the data to me to be able to do this analysis. What it says is we've got kind of a revolving door. So somebody is sitting in government, somebody is seeing a problem that AI could solve, then they're going outside the gates, if you will, and they're ready to contract to come and try and implement this. From a grassroots perspective, oh my gosh, this is fantastic, right? Because we've got real people on the ground who've encountered a problem, have stepped outside of government to incorporate to try to solve the problem. But coordination is, extremely low.
So that I'm going to start asking some of the questions that have come in, and that leads me to one here is, what role should the government versus private sector play in advancing AI in the United States? Because obviously it's, kind of the opposite in China, where you have the government really pushing and putting a lot of money in state-owned enterprises and universities.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I would bounce that back via COVID, right? So with COVID, we needed government, we needed pharma companies, we needed drug delivery companies, we needed community hospitals, we needed all these entities in what I'll call the artificial intelligence ecosystem. The federal government can do some parts very, very well, from the legislative, the executive branch, et cetera. Universities can provide some really great information, private companies, et cetera. So I don't think the answer is government control, but, kind of let the free market exist. But what we still need to do is we still need to get the government to say, this is what our focus area is going to be. And then let private sector, let government, let universities, think tanks, et cetera, then let them bring forth what they can bring forth.
So what about China's weaknesses? Because we've talked a lot about their strengths, the fact that they're ahead so much. What are the obstacles or weaknesses in their path to maintaining that leadership in AI?
Boy, I wish I could tell you. They're very far in the lead, and they don't have, certainly the Chinese government is, as you pointed out, and as everybody knows, certainly doesn't mind cracking down on dissonance. So people who would be protesting against it. So I don't think it's a question of China slowing down as much as the fact that we got to speed up. Okay, we need to provide.
What about the idea, Greg, of creativity and just innovation?
Yeah, so great. So with the U.S., if we've got 1,000 different projects going, what's going to eventually emerge is going to be the best project, right? And so, it's going to rise to the top. With China, perhaps they picked the right strategy, perhaps they didn't. But, once you have settled on one strategy, you're going to get a lot further, a lot faster than if you're still trying to figure out what your strategy is. Again, this is one of the strengths of our country, right? So we've got so many talented people in government and private industry and universities coming up with a whole bunch of ideas. The problem is we're still kind of in the springtime of this, and we're seeing the little buds coming out of the ground, but we have not yet realized what the best crops are. So we will win eventually, but if we get too far behind, what's going to be left to win?
And that leads to a question that Harrison Derlin asked about this idea of racing, the AI race. And he asked, what are we racing toward? And are we prepared to handle the consequences of achieving whatever goal that is? I think it's a great stand back question as we're all planning.
Yeah, you sort of cut out there at the end, Beth.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
So you cut out at the end of the question. Could you
so what are we racing toward, and are we prepared to handle the consequences of whatever goal we're trying to achieve?
Yeah, boy, I hope so, right? I know that a certain engineer in Google said that the AI he was working on had become sentient, and so then was capable of creating its own future, and that's been pretty widely disabused. But remember, AI is very use case centric, right? So with AI, so the AI to drive a smart car is very good at driving a smart car, but it's not really good at murdering people, right? That's not part of what its use case is. It's focused on this. What we need to be concerned with is bad actors coming in and changing the use case from, what's the best way to get from point A to point B, in the fastest times following the speed limit. We want to make sure that doesn't get added on, but killing as many people as possible along the way is perfectly okay. So, this is the issue I've got with AI. So with the technology, we're so far in front of where the ethics and morality and the thinking is. And that's why that question, I think, is a brilliant one. But the fact is, the genie's out of the bottle. Genie's not going to go back into the bottle. So it's a question of, how do we deal with it then? How do we put appropriate parameters on it?
So you're basically saying that this is a question that all of us should be asking ourselves is why AI? What do we want it to achieve? And what don't we want to apply it to, and what kind of limits do we want to place on it? But I think the challenge there is that, we may be the only country asking those questions in the end if we actually did engage in that conversation.
Yeah, I think that's a great one. And that, we have in this country and, in many countries, developed a rule of law that we all agree that these are things you can do and these are things you can't do. And there's always going to be bad actors breaking what those laws are. But we have to come up with that, and I'm going to use that word again, we have to come up with that governance. So what do we as a society believe is an ethical use of? As a simple matter with AI, my girlfriend, lives about a mile away. My telephone has made it so I could not tell you what her area code is. We have 3 different area codes. I don't know what her telephone number is anymore. I've been sufficiently dumbed down that I can pick up my phone and press the number beside her picture, and then it dials it automatically. We do run the risk of that happening, where AI takes on a whole lot more unfettered power than we as a society think is probably appropriate. But again, it's out there, Beth. We got to deal with this.
Yeah, I turn my stuff off so I can still function as a human being, but I don't think that a lot of people do that. And I certainly think there's a generational thing, like, all on purpose drive without Google Maps because I don't want to be dumb.
Yeah.
And I think it's important, but I don't know if anybody else, certainly none of my taxi Uber drivers do that. So there's a question here about nearshoring and Latin America. And I'm a huge supporter of paying more attention to the people who live in this hemisphere. I think it's a win-win to be investing and seeing the potential and encouraging the potential in Latin America. That helps everyone. Do you know anything about how, is there anything going on in Latin America, and what are the barriers there to having, kind of this be a strong suit for South America and Central America?
Yeah, and I agree with you. South and Central America are the great untapped resources. So many people, so many intelligent people, so much good stuff potential. I think that what we have failed to do as a country, this goes back to a consortium-based approach. Maybe it is North Central and South America come up with an AI. And take advantage of the resources in countries that are friendly to us, certainly to the extent that we can reach out to countries that are impoverished to be able to raise their standard of living. Again, we know that there's a boatload of very, very intelligent people there who can contribute to solving the problem. And if we then, the U.S., could encourage it from an educational standpoint and from a financial standpoint, I think everybody wins here.
General AI systems have long been a goal or dream of AI research. You talked about that with the idea of the sentient, the general AI. Is developing general AI necessary for AI competition, or can you focus just on narrow targeted AI systems and still be among the top competitors?
I mean, that's a great question, right? I think that at present, AI is very general and is very directed. Okay, so we want to, we want to improve policing, we want to improve environmental, we want to improve sustainability, we want to do all those things. The problem, I think, is if you were president of a company, would you want to stop there? So if you could see real tangible benefits out of a general AI, but again, remember, AI is use case based. So I think it depends on how you would define a general AI. So would it do everything that you're capable of? I mean, you're obviously esteemed in your career. Could AI conduct this interview as well as you could? I don't know.
Probably.
Almost certainly not. But again, the genie's out of the bottle. We're not going to be able to undo these sorts of things. Perhaps the value equation of general AI doesn't exist, but you darn well know somebody's going to try it, and somebody's going to try to build something like that to hopefully capture an advantage. At this point, I don't see it happening. I don't see the value equation. But I also know that I can't stop it any more than I can stop, the river from flowing, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, we're almost at the end, Greg, and I always like to end with a question that's focused on our forecasters, because our whole purpose here is to support them. And we always ask about how can our forecasters stay abreast of whatever topic we're talking about. So here, AI, what kind of places can they look to read more and go in depth?
Yeah, so it depends on which aspect of AI they want. Obviously, my interest is AI in government. And so, Brookings is light years ahead of everybody else in terms of the stuff that they're publishing of AI as it relates to public policy. If you're interested in the people or the dollars focus, the stuff Leadership Connect is putting out is great there. One of my new favorites is CSET out of Georgetown University School of Foreign Service. They publish some fantastic things there. So they do some of the analysis for you. So this is what it means. But they also have the data available that you can go out and do your own analyses.
Yes.
So those are sort of my big three.
Well, INFER's origins are from CSET, and some of our forecasters actually started with them. And a good friend of mine, Anna Puglisi, is there, and she writes a lot about China and technology. And she used to work with me, and I think she's the best. But they're brilliant people over at CSET, and we're, I think, really lucky to have inherited this program that they began.
And even I didn't know that. So,
yeah,
double emphasis, right?
Exactly. So that is a great way to end this.